All right, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30. Welcome to our special meeting, but we will wait to just 1 or 2 more minutes because there are many people wanting to join the meeting, so we'll wait 2 more minutes before we actually start. Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We did not expect to be seeing everyone so soon after our last meeting, but with everything going on, we also wanted to include Ray Team in some of these discussions along with the Reopen RQS Committee. So they've had a chance to look, and so we are having a special meeting this evening. Again, thank you all for joining us, and I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Salisbury.
I move that the board approve the, I'm sorry, is that the right one? I move that the board,
July 30th.
okay, I move that the board approve the July 30th, 2020 agenda.
Second.
And all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? All right. So again, thank you for being here. These are trying times for sure. There's a lot of things to discuss. Kids going back to school is an important issue for all of us. No one knows what the right answers are to any of these things. We're just all trying to do the best things for kids. We got to keep those at the top of the list for our parents and for our teachers. So we're doing our best to do that. I do want to share that we are meeting via Zoom tonight for a couple reasons, because we did want to meet together in person as a board, but we wouldn't, due to social distancing and things like that, we wouldn't have been able to accommodate everyone who would want to have joined. And it's easier to have everyone who wants to participate here in the Zoom meeting. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Dr. Markley to make a couple comments. And then we have 3 people who've asked to address the board before we get into our other discussion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to all for taking the time out to have this meeting. By the end of this meeting, we'd hope to have a recommendation and a board vote on moving the start date from August the 26th to September the 8th, and coming back on the 8th and coming back virtually at least 14 days afterwards to try and see where we will be, not only as a school district, but also in a metropolitan area where we're at with these COVID cases. We have continued to see increases, record increases in our metropolitan area. which is concerning to us. We know that different regional health directors have recommended that districts move to the 8th to give more time for districts to prepare to come back virtually or come back physically, however they intend to do it. But we think that is the right recommendation. It would require the board to amend the calendar. It would give our staff more time to prepare for the virtual platform that Dr. Huff will be discussing in a little bit. And it'll also give us time to continue to work on the matrix that has been presented to Ray team and massage that to where we can get it right, hopefully. So with that being said, Mr. President, I'll turn the meeting back over to you.
Mr.
You're
Moore,
muted, Rick.
you're muted.
Rick, you're muted.
All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there is a Q&A available if anyone wants to ask a question. It may not be answered live this evening, but it will be recorded and it will be addressed and added to our frequently asked questions information. So we have 3 people that are have asked to address the board this evening. Rachel, would you introduce the first one, please?
Yes, the first person that is asked to address agenda item 4.1 is Heather Howe.
All right. Thank you, Heather. If you can, Heather, turn your camera on and also unmute yourself if possible.
Bear with me. I am doing double screens here. Sorry for that.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank the Board of Education for allowing me to speak tonight on behalf of teachers of Raytown School District, specifically those that are in kindergarten. Tonight, I come to you as a very concerned kindergarten teacher, and I have 2 concerns. The first concern is the reopening of our classrooms at 100%. I'm not sure if that you are following South Korea's data and guidelines and how they are reopening, but I have been, because they've been doing a really good job. But I recently read on data trends on ourworldindata.org created by Oxford University. South Korea has some great guidelines, but the country is not the United States. South Korea, for example, has been wearing masks in public spaces because of the air pollution, and it has become a social norm, and they wear them early in the pandemic. They have very specific ways that they run their country with public contact tracing, isolation, and quarantining. We do not have the same supports here in the United States. I am constantly worried about giving COVID-19 to my students, and the thought of losing one of them is unfathomable. And it should be for you too. On the other side, I am also worried about transmitting or receiving it from a coworker and then or myself passing. Every time I think about a student passing or a colleague because of COVID-19, it reminds me of a Bible verse, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And I'm asking you, are you ready to play God and sacrifice a student or a staff member in the name of COVID-19 and reopening with 100% in person for pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade? The second concern I have is listening to your teachers that are in the trenches. Although students have learned in summer school, I feel they have learned more about counting tiles in the hallway to keep away from their peers, getting sanitizer, leaving the room for recess, and then getting it again before they play at recess and vice versa. How to stay in their seat because if someone's crayons fall to the floor, they cannot help the other student out. This is not how we should be teaching, especially in kindergarten. Pre-K and kindergarten teachers have constant student contact, teaching students hand over hand how to form letters, numbers, cutting with scissors, opening containers, and now changing clothes from accidents because they're not allowed to go to the nurse's office. I do not know if anyone has shared the math with you on sanitizing steps that teachers have taken, but I'll give you a little short clip of what it looks like in kindergarten. I only had 5 students show up to summer school, which was a great number. If each one of those students used the bathroom 5 times, it takes about 1 minute to sanitize after each student. That's 25 minutes. And then I have to wash my hands after each cleaning for 20 seconds. That adds another 8.5 minutes. That's 33.5 minutes that students are missing out on instruction and supervision. This does not count the countless times that I've had to wipe down after every activity that's completed or supplies being used, or when a student has an accident and I have to supervise them, changing clothes, giving them step-by-step instructions on how to do that. I'm urging you on behalf of kindergarten teachers and all of teachers for that matter to consider virtual instruction for the first 30 days of school and reevaluate in-person teaching starting after those 30 days. Why consider this? This gives parents a consistent amount of time for childcare instead of every 2-week debate over COVID-19 numbers, and allows teachers to plan accordingly for their own families and for planning instruction. When reentry is possible, there should be a low ratio of 50% of students per classroom on an AB schedule. Teachers need to be surveyed on what schedules they need for student success. They are the ones in the trenches. I urge you to prioritize keeping all staff and students safe, because the sacrifice of even one life is too much. Thank you for letting me address the board.
Thank you, Heather.
The next person who would like to speak is Bridget Pitts on agenda 4.1.
Hi, Bridget.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Okay. I'll be reading as well, getting my thoughts down. So I want to start by thanking you board members for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm speaking as president of Raytown MSTA, and I'm speaking for our membership in regards to the students in pre-K through 3rd grade starting at 100% without phasing in at 50% is not a concept supported by our membership. We feel it's unsafe and it is not equitable to our teachers and students either. Starting everyone at 50% will ensure a safe social distancing for our students and staff. This also allows teachers time to teach the procedures in smaller groups. This is beneficial, especially for younger children who have that shorter attention span and may need more practice. As a member of the reopening committee, we were only presented with one matrix. I've noticed on the board agenda tonight there are 2. And at the reopening committee, there wasn't any discussion of other options. So I'm looking forward to listening to more tonight. And then also in light of the survey sent out yesterday addressing only 4th through 12th grade teachers, the pre-K through 3 teachers would also like to have the opportunity to take their survey and voice their opinion. This was on the what days would you like the AB schedule to be, whether it be Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday. They were specifically told that they did not, that survey did not apply to them because pre-K were starting it back at 100%. So thank you again for letting me speak. I try to keep my thoughts concise.
All right. Thank you very much, Bridget.
The last person who has asked to address the board is Brad McTighe.
Hi there, Brad. Anytime you're ready. Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you yet.
I'm not much of a looker anyway. My name is Bradley McTighe. I have been a teacher for 19 years and a committed educator at Raytown High for 9 years. To the superintendents, members of the board, families, stakeholders, and students of Raytown schools, let me be brief but very clear. We all share the same goal, and that is to safely and effectively provide a free, appropriate public education for all of our students. We want to teach, and ideally, we would do so in person to build the rich relationships that our students need and deserve. I fully acknowledge the complexity and depth of this issue during a pandemic, and I want to thank you all for the work you have done to bring us closer to that goal. However, we are not there yet. We are not in a position to be considering opening our schools for in-person education. It is not safe to do so, especially for teenagers and adults, and especially since more data is coming out daily to suggest that children as young as 9 can carry, transmit, and die from COVID-19. We must consider, first and foremost, the safety and well-being of all affected RQS parties, including teachers, support staff, students, and their families. Again, I want to be clear. We must move forward with a late start and online school to the very best of our ability and resources until there is no widespread community transmission of this virus in order to fulfill that shared goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone who spoke to us this evening. All right, Dr. Markley or Travis, who's going to speak next?
I think we're going to pull up we have a little short presentation to give the board. And who's driving that? Rachel, are you driving that?
Who's giving the presentation? Is Travis? You probably can't say it's going to be short.
It's going to be a tag team effort between Travis, Brian, Steve, and I. And Dr. Shelton, are you driving the bus here?
I am. If you'll just give me a moment here. I lost the presentation. It's coming back. Okay, there you go. Sorry for the delay.
Okay. Tonight we want to go over a few things we mentioned in the beginning. A start date. We'll talk a little bit about our instructional platform moving forward. Obviously, it's going to be virtual for at least the first 2 weeks is what we'll be recommending. Talk a little bit about the database decision matrices. We have a couple out there that we're working through, and then any other remaining components that we may have for the board to hear. We're not going to start and go back over the entire plan again. We did that in the last meeting. We want to talk about what Ray Team has recommended in the conversations we had with them and the reopening committee as we did that process last week and a couple weeks prior. So go ahead. Next slide. Just to briefly talk about some of the health department's recommendations, Jackson County has recommended, or they will come out, we think, with a recommendation of school districts moving their start date to the September the 8th, and also come back on September the 8th in a virtual platform until we start to see some declines in the cases. We expect Kansas City to do the same. Our neighbors on the other side of the state line in Johnson County have come out with their matrix and those type of recommendations as well. We anticipate that a lot of the counties surrounding us that are included in the case count will probably do the same, whether it be Platte or Clay or Cass, etc. So next slide, please. Okay. I believe Travis and Brian are going to visit with you a little bit about this title here. Oh, we lost it. Okay.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I think let me see, go ahead and try and share my screen. And well, actually, before I do that, I give just a little bit of a background. We are going to talk about two different matrices tonight. And just want to reiterate, it's already been said, but what we're bringing is draft forms of these just as informational items tonight to get some feedback and some direction on moving forward. We have a lot more conversations to have, and those conversations will take place over the next week or so. because we would like to bring a more final version of this to the board on August 10th. We feel this is a very important part of our plan, and really tonight's meeting was focused on the reopening date, but this is still an important part of the plan for you all to at least be given some information on at this time. These are, I'm going to go ahead and share this first one with you. All right, so I trust you can see the this plan on your screen. Again, just some little background. This matrix originated from New York, and we've been trying to gather information on what sorts of thresholds we should look at, and what that might look like, so we can remove I don't know, what mostly so we can plan forward, so parents have an idea about what's coming up. It's based on the science of the spread of the virus, and it's been a very complex process. We've brought these matrices to several different groups, including Ray Team and the Reopening Committee, as well as our local health officials. It is a fast-moving process, and there are changes along the way, and we do want to make sure that everybody's, again, part of the process as we move beyond this point with those changes. Again, we did seek some input from our local health officials, and including Jackson County, Kansas City, as well as Children's Mercy Hospital. We did receive some feedback from Children's Mercy Hospital, and their feedback was along the lines of reiterating that children 9 and under are at less risk to be in the school setting. They are not as large of transmitters of the disease, and when they get the disease, it's not as severe for them. So you'll see some delineations of ages within the plan, and those are based on the assumption that that children under 10 do not transmit the disease and do not get the disease at as high of a level. The other assumptions that we have on these, and they are labeled at the bottom, and you'll see between one plan and the next that there are more assumptions that were made. One is that there's a baseline of 5% positive, and that is based on the World Health Organization's recommendation that you shouldn't look to reopen businesses until you completely reopen, until you are below 5% positive in the community. It's also based on the assumption that that's been put out by Children's Mercy Hospital, as well as the Center for Disease Control, that we can look at children under 10 a little differently than we look at other children. And then also that we're restricted by local mandates. So if Kansas City or Jackson County decides to restrict us even more than what these matrices have, then we would be following those mandates. The first of these matrices is the more similar to the original matrix that was taken to Ray Team, and this was a couple important parts of the matrix. They're fairly similar in that they both of them have four rows or columns. I'm sorry, and the most important are the columns at the very right. The level of mitigation, and this is how we would return if we return at all, and the thresholds. We were seeking input from our local health officials on the thresholds column, and so we didn't really do much work with it because we were hoping that we would get some direction. Due to lack of direction, we did make changes on the thresholds later based on information that we were able to gather, and also based on some other matrices that we were able to take a look at. So in this case, as in the other, there is a phase-in process. So as the disease is more serious, is up at the top, and as the local the rates of infection go down, we see more and more students coming into school. And so in this first version, we have the scenario 4 being all virtual. This is the most serious of the scenarios. As the infection rate goes down, we look at virtual instruction for the older grades, 4 through 12, and the delineation is at 4th grade because that's where we see the cutoff between 9 and 10-year-olds. And then the scenario 2 coming back 50% attendance for pre-K 3. And then following that, as the infection rate continued to drop, 50% attendance for 412, 100% attendance for pre-K 3, and then finally 100% attendance for all. We found the thresholds on the right to be difficult to gather based on the information that we can get from Jackson County or Kansas City. And so one of the major changes we made from one matrix to the other was to reevaluate that and change that around. The other difference between the two is removing of this second row and having the children come back grades 4 through 12 in 100%, in grades pre-K through 3 and 100% capacity, which was based on the Children's Mercy and CDC recommendations that children that age should be in school. And actually at the comments that they made that it's more detrimental for them to be at home than it is for them to be at school because of the lack of the educational slide that these students experience when they're not receiving their education. And so we try to take into account a whole lot of input as we move from this matrix to the next. The second version of the matrix was the one that was presented to the reopening committee. And again, you can see what those changes are. I will point out that the thresholds here were based on Eastern Jackson County information. So these thresholds are actually completely different from the original or the first version that went to rating. And what we see here is we're looking at a 14-day rolling average of % positive infection rate below. If it's above 10% or higher for 7 consecutive days, we move into this most restrictive of categories. And then dropping down if we see that rate between 5 and 9.9%, and then the most, everybody's back in school if we see that rate below 5%, as the World Health Organization has shown. The data is here, and it's actually referenced at the bottom here. Here's the website for Eastern Jackson County. We have found this to be a very helpful website because it provides as accurate and recent information as we can possibly get. And it allows parents to be able to see exactly where we're at and can try to center themselves on the matrix. So the lines that we see here, here's 10%. This is back in April. This is current. This is actually 4 days ago. The data is not completely current. It takes some time for Eastern Jackson County to collate the data and then put it onto the spreadsheet. We chose this 14-day rolling average because it's a statistically more predictable way to look at this. And so what you're looking at is the average of this day as well as the previous 13 days put together. And so it shows trends much better rather than looking at a daily change. We also looked at not making transition until we're 7 days in because, again, we need to see a solid movement of either increasing or decreasing before we start to make changes. And so just as an example, you'll see that this is the 10% mark. And if we were back in school back in July or currently, we would currently be in this phase right now that would have our students, depending on which matrix you're using, they would be either partially in school or completely in school, but we would be not at the most restrictive phase of being all virtual. Once we go above the 10% mark for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we'd be a couple days away right now of moving to all virtual school. And as you can see, our trend for Jackson County is on the rise. So that is our process here at this point. And like I said, we're going to have a lot more conversations about these matrices over the next few days. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions right now for Dr. Huff? All right. Thank you, Dr. Huff.
I'll unshare.
Okay. Just to go through what we're looking at for the calendar and ask for a revision from the board. Obviously, the start date is September 8th, 2020. You can see the bullets below. We think it provides opportunities for counselors to adjust schedules, time for staff development as far as the virtual platform. And probably the biggest one is providing time for the technology distribution, because we will be PK through 12, all students having their own device. Now, to make adjustments, so we're adding another 6-7 days roughly onto the calendar. We would remove the early release Wednesdays, so we could still, and also a couple PD days, September 17th and October the 8th, where we could get out of school May the 25th, and that does include 36 hours of inclement weather, so roughly 6 days, snow days. But if we are still virtual at that time when the snow days come, we do have a approved plan by DESE to have virtual school and not count those snow days. Next slide, please. Any questions on any of that from the board? Amy?
Dr. Markley, I had a question. What would be the date that teachers would come back?
We would still maintain the calendar that we have currently.
Okay.
And that's coming up roughly next week, new teachers and moving on. All those meetings are obviously going to be Zoom and the Zoom platform, so we can start to get ready for the professional development that needs to occur between now and then. So we would not change that.
And then the no early release Wednesdays means the entire year.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I can't see everybody, so. Okay.
Are we assuming that DESE is going to keep the number of hours the same?
That's correct. The new calendar, the calendar that we turned in, is all we have to go is 1,044 hours. They're going to keep us probably at that. But even with that and the adjustment in the calendar that we're looking to do, we can still be out on the 25th prior to Memorial Day. Dr. Shelton?
Thank you, Dr. Markley. In this plan, we would bring all staff back August 3rd, so that would be this Monday. Currently, our staff has been given the opportunity to work from home when possible. But as we approach the beginning of school, new teachers are scheduled to report on August 12th. Returning teachers, I believe, are scheduled to report on August 18th. And other instructional staff are reporting after that, such as IAs and interventionists. But the plan now is for all staff who are 12-month or whose calendars are already started. As an example, our principals returned to work last week. Some of our support staff, some of our counselors are scheduled to report to work. And so on August 3rd, Monday, if you're a 12-month employee or your calendar has already started, then we would ask for you to report to work, normal schedule, normal work day, normal work week. And then as individuals' calendars begin, they would report to work as well. In that scenario, all employees would be expected to wear a mask when they can't socially distance. If they're not feeling well, to stay at home, to complete a daily health check, which includes taking your temperature. Obviously, as I said a moment ago, maintain social distancing, wash hands or disinfect hands on a regular basis, and then clean and or disinfect your workspace on a regular basis. For those employees who are hourly employees, instead of clocking in, we would ask you to use the Frontline app. There's an app that you can use when you come into our network field. It will allow you to clock in and clock out once you enter the network field around your building, your school, wherever you may work. And then also at this time, no guests would be allowed on school district property. you have any questions regarding August 3rd and staff returning to work?
Obviously, we feel bad for everybody in this whole thing, but I'm thinking about brand new teachers, their very first teaching job. What kind of special helps are we going to be giving them to get started during this time?
I can address that, Rick. We are going to have new teacher orientation just as we always do. And we do have plans to personalize that to the virtual setting as much as possible. And, really we are evaluating where we are with community spread as we work towards these professional development opportunities that we have coming up, including our new teacher orientation. We may end up doing that mostly virtually. But we do have plans for those new teachers because, yes, we agree with you. What a way to start into your teaching profession.
Dr. Huff, can I ask you a question, please? Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, sir.
I appreciate your discussion regarding the matrix. And it sounds to me like you put a lot of time into it and there was a lot of thought given to it. But I'd like to know, and that what was transpired was you provided the majority report, I assume, unless it was unanimous. Can you give me other options that were considered, and if any, and what was the strength of commitment amongst those parties that supported the minority view?
We honestly, those are the two reports that we presented to the committees that are participating in this process. And the feedback we got was positive towards those. There's certainly a whole lot of discussion, which is showing us that we need to go back and have those same kind of discussions around these reports. And quite honestly, we have received some good feedback that allows us to make some nice adjustments that we think that are going to be helpful for a lot of people out there. This is certainly, more of a discussion, not necessarily majority versus minority, but we want to work towards as much of a plurality as possible to appreciate, the whatever stipulations we put in place. So there will be a lot of conversations moving forward. But as far as, there being dissent in the conversations with those groups, they appreciated the direction we were moving when they received these options.
So let me get this straight. The administration presented this matrix and to Ray team, and they did some evaluation, provided feedback. Is that how the process?
Right. Now, I will say that this process has been condensed. Typically, when we go to a Ray team or any other committee that may work on something, there's a lot of back and forth over time. And this is very compressed. And so the compression of the schedule means that sometimes alterations are made without, being able to go back to that group again. And so we do feel it's important that there have been enough alterations that it's good to go back to that group again. But again, we are on a time schedule. We have a date that's looming where students are going to start school, and parents are wondering, how are we going to decide whether my student should be virtual or in person? And how am I going to decide to even send my kid? And if I am going to send my kid and they're going to be virtual, how am I going to know to plan ahead as to when they're actually going to be in school? So we do feel it's important to have it in place, but we also want to have it in such a way that these groups feel comfortable about it. And there's a good number of stakeholders involved, from teachers, support staff, parents. There's a good range of stakeholders that are giving input with this.
Okay, let me follow to just the last question here. The reaction, my feedback, it's very complex, yes. and parents want to return to normal, and I think what they also mean, they want to return to a predictable life. And when you get into graphs and try to analyze the slope of the curves, that's not something families do at night around the dinner table. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily it's something we shouldn't consider, but the other avenue, I'd like to hear some feedback from you. What about the all virtual? all virtual scenario where we just say we'll let this play out for the semester and we'll become a virtual operation. Tell me why that would not make sense to you.
All right, so I heard two questions there. One is we want families to be able to have, find some normalcy and predictability. One of the reasons we made some adjustments to the thresholds was because we wanted to have data that was, one, easily accessible, and two, easily decipherable. And we have found, and also three, that is reflective of the science. And so those are really our three measures. We found that the World Health Organization referenced the percent positive. That's the percent of tests that are given, and the percent of you have an overall number of tests and the positive tests from those overall tests. The percent positive is for those tested folks. That's a recognized measure, and it has good data behind it. So we wanted to find that measure. Jackson County, Eastern Jackson County's website is outstanding in providing a nice graph that we feel that is going to be as easily accessible and decipherable by parents as possible. So it does make things as predictable as we could possibly make it. But you're right, statistics gets messy and sometimes complex. We want to try to simplify it as much as possible.
But let me just make
Sure.
ask you a question. We're assuming that our parents will know where to get the data, know how to interpret the data. And my concern is that without testing that assumption, we could have a situation where parents say, this is not predictable and I don't care what it says. I mean, some of this you probably need, you arguably need a college course in statistics to really understand it. I mean, in all fairness. And I'm troubled by saying to parents, well, you need to familiarize yourself with this data source and with the science. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
So I'm hearing two bits of feedback there. One is that, keep in mind that on our reopening committee, we have parents and we get feedback from parents as to what is, easily accessible and what isn't. The other is that, the feedback is that we probably need to educate our families. And so when we land on whatever we land on, I think an outstanding idea is to present, produce some videos, some sort of parent education, which actually we are planning on doing for the virtual setting anyway. We have that virtual landing page that we're going to link a bunch of videos for parents and how to do a lot of things that are new to them. And this can absolutely be one of them. How do you decipher how we're coming back? Because it's not completely straightforward. It's as straightforward as we feel it can be. But you're right. It does involve believing in statistics, I guess would be the best way to say it.
Dr. Huff?
Yes, sir.
As far as the virtual learning after the September 8th, what's the reason for pushing the date back if we're going to go virtual? Couldn't we go virtual on our regular date? So
your point is outstanding because the question would be there's no risk. We could start the first day going virtual because there's no risk, right? The kids are still at home. The problem is that there's a logistical problem with going virtual immediately. I'll tell you just one anecdotally. We're going to find, right now we're doing enrollments for students, and parents are choosing either all virtual or in person. And we have to staff based on that. And so when we get to a certain level where we have, say, 80% of the families that have gone through the enrollment process, we'll have a pretty decent idea of how many are going to be virtual and how many are going to be in person. And then we need to go and look at our staffing for that. And so how many third grade teachers are we going to need at Robinson? And we might have 3. 2 of them may end up being in person and 1 may be virtual because of how everybody lands. At elementary, it's fairly straightforward. In secondary, we're going to have to actually completely remaster schedule, which we spend months doing in the spring. Now we're going to have to compress that down and do it in a matter of maybe 2 weeks. And to be able to be completely ready for school, we need to have that process done. The other is that we're asking our teachers to do something, again, that is fairly complex and new. Now, we did do it back in the spring, but I will tell you now that the way we did it in the spring is not going to be completely the way that we do it in the fall here. For instance, we did not hold students accountable in the spring. If students didn't turn their assignments in, remember, we did not actually drop their grades. we are going to hold students accountable in the fall. And so you've heard me say before, we want guaranteed and viable curriculum. Guaranteed curriculum means that we guarantee that we're going to be able to present 100% of the curriculum to 100% of the kids, and they're going to be 100%, it's going to be 100% accessible for them. That is very difficult to do. And we want to train our teachers up properly and also give them time to write those lesson plans so that they feel confident about being able to deliver those lessons in the appropriate manner. So it does take time, and we want to take that time within those first 2 weeks. I think it's really a blessing for us that we'll be able to deliver a better product.
So without the situation we've run into recently, we wouldn't have been prepared to do it on our original start date?
We were planning on starting on the first day, and we knew all of these logistical problems then. And we were prepping principals up to saying, hey, we're going to have to remaster schedule in like a few days. And that was daunting. And so this additional time certainly gives us some breathing room. We're going to take advantage of it, and we're going to use that time to be even better prepared.
Do we know how close we are to teachers who feel comfortable being in school and the number of students? Do we have any grasp on that yet? How close we are to that, and how we're selecting which teachers are going to be virtual and which ones are going to be in person?
Yeah, we've been surveying teachers all through the summer, and thank you to all teachers who are out there that we've been getting great feedback from teachers, a high level of participation in these surveys, which, during their summer break, that means that they're absolutely engaged throughout this whole process. And it has given us good direction. Yes, we have made a lot of changes in Travis's plan based on the feedback that we're getting in those surveys. Just an example was that one of the big things that folks said is we want to have temperatures taken. And that's driven us to the point of having these, very fancy temperature, thermometers that look like you're going through a metal detector at the entrance of all the buildings. And we hope, that is a measure that's going to bring some comfort, because that's based on their feedback. But that's just one. We layer these together, and there's lots of different measures we have in place. So
we'll
continue to get feedback.
You're out there. Mr. Burton asked a question surrounding where we're at in enrollment so far, and which parents and families are choosing in person and those that are choosing virtual. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
Absolutely. So I have numbers as of this morning. We had approximately, 20-25% of our families have started the process. And so we are looking at numbers on 3 levels: those who have submitted and residency has approved, those who have submitted and they're waiting in residency's queue, and then those who have started the process but they haven't submitted, which means that their answer is not final. If we take the ones who have started the process, like I said, we have about 20-25% of our student population. If not, we have a little bit less than that. And right now, the last 2 days have been pretty consistent that we have approximately 30% of our families who have selected to start the year virtual, or to be a virtual student for first semester at least.
Do we have any idea of the percentage of teachers who will prefer virtual or prefer to be in school?
Do you want me to answer that?
You can, Marlene. Yeah, that's part of the survey that we sent out earlier. Go ahead.
Basically, we haven't really given teachers a choice to be virtual or not virtual, because we're not sure how many virtual teachers we're actually going to need. That will be completely dependent on the number of students, families that decide that they want to be virtual. So once we get the final enrollment numbers, we can determine at that time which teachers, how many grade levels or how many subjects and so on and so forth that need to be virtual. Then we'll at that point ask if there's teachers that want to teach virtual, and we'll make choices at that point. Does that make sense, or do you have further questions?
That makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Let me follow up on that question if you don't mind. I thought the question was, have you surveyed the teachers to determine their preference of virtual or in school? Have you surveyed the teachers?
No, we actually did not ask that question. I think we felt like what I felt like is I didn't want them to get the impression that decisions were going to be made based on how many teachers were going to be virtual and how many were going to be in person. We left that decision to the students and their families of whether they wanted to be virtual or non. I hated to make the promise that a lot of people could go virtual if we ended up not having enough virtual positions.
Mr. Todd, we do have somewhat of an answer to the question you're asking. Travis, do you want to refer back to the survey that was sent shortly after, the survey that was sent to parents? And it was more, it wasn't for them choosing to be virtual, it was how comfortable they felt coming back. That was the questions that were asked. Are you out there, Travis?
Yes, we asked, and this has been, some weeks ago at this point, but, before the case levels were rising. But we did ask a couple of questions, basically, which is, are you comfortable coming back? And then the second question is, will you be coming back? And at the time, 99% in both instructional and non-instructional plan on coming back. Now, at the time, like we said, we weren't asking if you prefer to be virtual or not. That process will need to be worked out through HR once the numbers are determined for student attendance.
They said they were coming back, but did they say they were comfortable?
And I don't have the data right in front of me. It was a lower percentage so we asked, are you comfortable with concerns, not comfortable, so we had those levels. Again, I don't have that in front of me. I didn't realize that would come up. So, but we can get you that information.
Okay. Alonzo, also to keep in mind that as we move forward, we had planned to ask more specific questions as we receive more specific answers back. Mm-hmm. And so once I'd mentioned the master scheduling process and my example with the third grade teachers. What we'll be doing is when we get to that place where we know, with the example of the Robinson third grade teachers, let's say we know that now we have 20 kids that want to be virtual and 30 that want to be in person. So we'll take, the first step would be that principal going and talking to those teachers and seeing who's comfortable doing the virtual instruction, who's comfortable. And if we have, one that says, I want to do virtual and two that say they want to do in person, that's fantastic. It may not be as clean as that though. And Marlene is developing processes for us to be able to work out, well, how are we going to figure out who's going to do what? And at the secondary level, well, it's more along the lines of sections. And so if we have 10 sections of algebra and we only have enough in-person kids to fill 8 of those sections and 2 of them need to be virtual, then that principal will need to go to those teachers and figure out, okay, who's going to be doing in person and who's going to be doing virtual instruction.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if now's the time or you're talk about it later, but I'm still wondering about synchronous versus asynchronous instruction and what decisions have been made regarding that. Because I think if we're going to do virtual, it needs to be synchronous when at all possible.
I can address that. And yes, that is a later slide. And if you'd like, we can wait to that slide and I can go through my talk.
No,
and then
we'll just wait till you come to it.
That sounds good.
Steve, Dr. There he is. Okay. Okay. Starting with virtual learning on September the 8th. As we said before, those are the recommendations that are coming out of our local health departments, both Jackson County and Kansas City. Also, and moving to the 22nd, we had some recommendations from folks about it would be good to wait 14 days after the Labor Day holiday in accordance with what happened on July the 4th when we saw an increase of cases after the holiday, and maybe expect the same thing again. Right now, with the cases continue to rise, I think we've I haven't seen the numbers today, but the 2 previous days, we've broken records 2 days in a row on positive cases. But that is the plan to move forward to at least the 21st and evaluate prior to that whether or not we can come back physically. Next slide.
Well, actually, this is the slide I was referencing.
Oh, well, go ahead then. Go ahead.
President Rick. All right, so virtual learning. We are going to come back with virtual, and obviously we'll have parents who have chosen virtual and parents who have chosen in person, and all of them are going to be virtual. Again, an assumption, and I'm sorry, Alonzo had asked a question earlier about, why don't we just stay virtual with everybody? And one of the important considerations is that virtual instruction becomes a more viable instructional tool the older the child is. And so it's a great instructional alternative for high school, but it is a terrible alternative for a 4-year-old. And so there is this kind of transition or this continuum of when a student gets to be where they're really able to learn well in the virtual setting. And we also feel that obviously the skills that we're teaching in the lower grades, those basic foundational skills of reading, writing, communicating, math, thinking is really, really important. And so we want to try to follow the science, but also understand that those students need to be in person as much as possible, because that's just the way they're going to learn best. And I'll address, Rick, your question about asynchronous versus synchronous. We have a handbook for the parents and students, and also a handbook that's coming out for staff. And I'll just say that, for anybody that's interested in giving feedback, and there's lots of teachers that are listening now, send me an email and I'll get that out to you tomorrow. It's in a good enough form that we feel we can start getting some larger feedback. I was planning on principals working with their BLTs and their leadership teams to try and get teacher feedback on that over the next week. We hope to have it finalized in a week. But within that handbook, we do discuss asynchronous versus synchronous. Now, it is not appropriate to do synchronous instruction all day long, but from the elementary perspective, the schedule that we're using is driving it at synchronous instruction for 4 hours a day. And that is more than what we were doing in the fall. We do believe that it is important that students are learning from their teacher as much as possible, just like in the school day. And there is some individual learning as well, and we have some applications that are going to help that along and make that a little bit easier. We've also got some tools for teachers for them to be able to do synchronous instruction a little easier. That changes as you move up in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't. There may be some classes at the high school level where there needs to be synchronous instruction every day. But we do plan at the high school level, really at the secondary level, of having synchronous instruction probably every other day per class. So a student can anticipate probably around 3 hours of synchronous instruction a day, and from a variety of different classes. And then the rest of their days will be filled up with that asynchronous instruction.
Hey, Brian.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Why are we looking at every other day instead of keeping static groups together?
Okay, we're talking about virtual instruction.
Okay.
Okay.
Never mind.
Gotcha. And we are looking at every other day. Is what we're trying to do is what we did find last year is if we just use the regular bell schedule, then a student might have synchronous instruction at 7:30, and then another synchronous instruction at 10, and then not another one until 2:30. And so it's just kind of jumbled through the day with lots of big gaps. So maybe if we compress that synchronous instruction into the morning, and if we do it every other day, then we can do maybe odd classes on one day, even classes on the next day. So it's definitely a plan in motion. And that was actually just an idea that came up today from principals. So we're trying to be very responsive to the great ideas that are coming out, because we're doing a lot of new stuff right now.
Hey, Brian, or just to everyone, in regards to what you just said, I just want to repeat in case people have joined late. We opened up the question and answers because we want to gather as many questions as possible. But the individual board members are listening to the presentations tonight. So we're not going to be answering these questions as individual board members, and the people who can answer them are giving their presentations. So they're not going to be answering those right now. We're gathering the questions because we want to know the questions are out there, and they will be saved and addressed, but not right now during the board meeting and during these presentations.
Dr. Markley? Dr. Markley?
Yes, ma'am.
You had sent us an email. On that email, it was from Jackson County. It says that they are recommending moving school start date to September the 8th with virtual attendance until a downward trend occurs. But according to the information that's been provided now, we're talking about virtual school for 2 weeks. Is that right?
Correct. And then reevaluate where we're at prior to that 2 weeks ending.
And you've given us the matrix for what you're looking for, basically, to determine whether or not to continue with virtual school or to start with in school.
That's correct. We're going to let the numbers guide our decisions.
Now, will we still offer virtual school even though we have kids coming to school?
Yes, kids will have an opportunity if the numbers allow us to come back. There'll still be those that want to be virtual, and they have that option to be virtual.
Last time we talked about this, I had asked a question, and Marlene had stated that there was they were not making a decision on teachers who have medical conditions that makes them vulnerable to the COVID-19. So, and I heard the discussion this evening, but I'm still curious, will that be one of the guiding tools that we will use for offering virtual teachers the opportunity to go virtual? Will we use that as one of our guiding tools to help us in making that decision?
Yes, we will look at each specific request from staff that would like to do virtual and what accommodation that they may need. It'll be done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I'm still asking that question because I still haven't felt that it's been resolved to my understanding. Will we give those particular teachers that have a health issue priority?
Yes, we will, as long as we have to have verification from a physician, but yes, we will.
That is good. Thank you.
Dr. Markley?
Yes, sir.
And this may be too early to ask this question, but has the High School Activity Association made any recommendations as far as fall sports? And moving back to the 8th, where we were ready to start on the 26th, what does this do with fall sports?
That's a good question, but that next slide is coming up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Dr. Shelton's going to share at the beginning of the summer when we started allowing students in extracurricular activities to participate once again on June the 15th. We had a phase-in type program to where we could allow students to come in safely and use the facilities to condition, etc. And he's going to mention what those are, and then I'll speak to what Mr. Landers is questioning on with Misha. Dr. Shelton, go right ahead.
Thank you. And I'd like to, before I begin, I want to compliment our activity directors, our activity coordinators, our coaches and our sponsors and our staff who work with our students in activities. They have done an outstanding job working with our students, maintaining those relationships, providing as much support and direction as possible as you can in this environment, and just very proud of the work that our directors and coordinators and coaches and sponsors have done. As Dr. Markley mentioned, we have a phase-in process, began June 15th. That initial process from an athletic standpoint was just basic conditioning, running, getting in shape, doing activities, calisthenics, some outdoor strength and conditioning type activities, no weight room activity, nothing along those lines. Obviously social distancing, small groups, wellness checks every day, those type of precautions being taken. Then once we arrived to July 6th, we moved to phase 2, very similar in nature in regards to the precautions we were taking, but sports were allowed to start doing sport-specific conditioning, sport-specific drills. Once again, still focusing on getting in shape, getting stronger, those sorts of things. But no physical contact, no competition. There wouldn't be any 5-on-5 or 3-on-3 in basketball. There wouldn't be any 7-on-7 or offensive, defensive line drills, any of those type of things. But sport-specific conditioning and drills. At the same time, band and vocal and those type of groups could start doing some outdoor activities, and some of those band camps and those type of things are going on. And they can do those things outside as long as they're maintaining social distance, hopefully working in small groups. But as you know, our band and vocal groups are fairly large. Phase 3, we haven't gotten to phase 3 yet. Phase 3 would be sport-specific, competitive type drills, where we would start to see some of those 5-on-5, 3-on-3 basketball, 7-on-7 offensive, defensive line competition. I felt neglect in phase 2 that we were using the weight room, beginning to use the weight room. Obviously, they would use the weight room in phase 3. We haven't gotten there yet. We're still in phase 2. As Mr. Landers and Dr. Markley is going to mention here in a minute, August 10th is coming. August 10th is the beginning of fall sports practices. And at this time, we're anticipating the beginning of fall sports on August 10th with the limitations that MSHA puts in place. And at this point, whatever those are, will follow. But at this point, that's where we are with activities. And once again, I just want to compliment our coaches and athletes and sponsors and teachers for all the hard work they've done. Really great leadership out of Nick Atkins and Patricia Huttons, and Joe Corzine and Jeff Haynes and Matt Showman. They've all done a great job. And of course, all of our coaches and athletes and folks who participate in co-curricular activities have just done a wonderful job. And I just want to say thank you to them. Dr. Markley?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shelton. Mr. Landers, to answer your question with MSHA, the only guidance that they have given is fall sports will occur. The other piece of guidance that they've had, those districts that do not schedule some form of in-person school will not be able to participate in activities. They haven't defined on whether that is your first day of school or at quarter or at semester. We're still waiting for that guidance. But they've left it up to the local districts. Now, I will tell you that the Suburban Conference is working to come up with ways to, as the seasons begin, and there's certain games that can't be played because of an outbreak of COVID, on how they're going to reschedule those, and et cetera. So that's where we're at with MSHA. Not a whole lot of guidance other than the fact that they're giving us local control to do so. So we are here tonight. August 10th is our next board meeting. That is the first day of fall sports practices. We can move to those practices as long as we stay in the phase 2 side of things where we're taking precautions. Now, your football teams are going to say, now, wait a minute, we got to get ready for Friday night, and we got to bump into each other and bang around and things like that. We're not so sure we're ready for that, but at the same time, we're not so sure we shut them down completely as long as they're following the phase 2 protocol.
Mr. Markley?
Yes, sir.
If a student chooses to be virtual, can they participate?
As far as we're concerned, yes. And MSHA has said if you have a hybrid type program like what we're suggesting we may get to, they can be virtual and still be eligible as long as they're taking 5 classes, a few of the other things that they have to do, but very similar to what they'd have to do during the year, Mr. Burton.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a question, Dr. Markley.
Yes, sir.
This meeting is a little different than I expected. And the reason is because a couple of weeks ago, I learned that Ray Team was going to be involved in helping with the opening plan. And I thought that's a great idea because I recall in the compensation discussion that we had a few months ago, Ray Team was practically leading the conversation on that negotiation. And I was extremely impressed from the information that they provided and the high degree of intelligence of that group. Now, I expected that we would hear something for Ray Team, and that's why I asked the question: what are the views? Because we're now going to need to vote on something at some point, and Ray Team's a part of this collaborator, but we haven't heard from him, and I may have missed that in the translation of the meeting, but I thought that was going to be an integral part of the information sharing and collaboration for this evening. Can you comment on that? Did I get that wrong?
Well, the comment, maybe not entirely, or really this meeting was primarily to move the calendar date and get the school date set at a different time. But Ray Team did meet and went over the Dr. Huff's, and he might be able to elaborate some on this. The primary job there was to walk them through the reopening plan and get their feedback on that plan, and get any recommendations that they might have, and work through those issues and change any of those plans. And as the process went along, there's a lot of discussion, but not a lot of change in the plan. And we feel like Ray Team supported the anywhere from the mitigation efforts that we're going to do, along with just the minute details of the plan. So we feel like they're in a good place there. Travis, do you want to mention anything more about that?
You bet. Thanks, Mr. Toda. Good question. We met with Ray Team, and thank you. I was going to ask somebody to put that up. 2 days for a total of 8 hours, and we went through the plan from start to finish and asked Ray Team to approach it regarding working conditions, because they're a staff advocacy group. And so this newsletter here, which I don't know if the board received a copy of when it went out, but it delineates all of the recommendations made by Ray Team regarding the reopening plan, everything from start date to class sizes, face coverings, cleaning, the whole thing, so that those areas of concern that have caused anxiety for staff members could be addressed, and something could be created to hopefully reduce that anxiety. And that, because there's no sense in creating a plan that our staff isn't able to follow. So we felt like it was a great meeting, and we went through all the big pieces, but we literally went through every line of the plan during that 2-day, 8-hour period, and they came up with recommendations, and we have since put these recommendations in the draft plan that's attached to this agenda item. They're labeled in green for your review. So yes, to answer your question, they worked on that very hard and came up with some great recommendations.
So what I was referring to though was the matrix. We talked tonight about the matrix. Did you get their opinions, and can someone summarize their opinions based upon their participation in the matrix discussion?
You bet. It was the first thing well, it wasn't the first. The first thing was temperature checks. That was a top consideration for all staff and parents when we were surveying. But then we went into the start date and calendar, and we spent a lot of time on the first matrix that Dr. Huff presented. We talked about the goal was Ray Team would like to see, us create a matrix that was based in science, so that we could make safe decisions on what it would look like to return to school. We talked about the fact that, we were seeking input from the county and the city of Kansas City, trying to get, them to say, here's what the thresholds should be. In rate team, we discussed the fact that the thresholds needed to be addressed, and the matrix we presented was basically a template to say, here's something we're looking at, here's what we're trying to create. And so if you see there, you'll note that, the reopening scenario matrix, which is still in the process of approval and will be shared at a later date, will then be used to determine if and when to phase into in-person learning, and which is based on COVID-19 statistics provided by the health department. So we spent a lot of time on that, and I would gather to say that Ray team felt good about the fact that we were trying to create that matrix. It had been augmented to something different that was then presented to the reopening committee based on the information Dr. F talked about, so like data available and that sort of thing, especially with the thresholds. And so, but we've continued to hear a lot of feedback on it, and which has prompted us to continue to work on it. It's not something that needed to be decided upon tonight. As you can tell, if this board approves the September 8th start date, and then we go virtual for a minimum of 2 weeks, the first possible in-person date would be September 22nd. So we still have time to work on it, but we do want to get something to you soon, hopefully August 10th, because as Dr. Huff also mentioned, parents are going to want to know, and they're going to want to have an idea of what to look forward to, and like when they might be able to return safely.
Dr. Markley?
Yes.
Thank you, Travis. This may be for Travis. Well, I'm not sure. I want to talk just a second about enrollment. Melissa shared that 20 to 25% approximately have started the process.
That's correct.
And of that amount, approximately 30% have chosen virtual. Now, and we don't know if that's elementary, secondary, but then Dr. Huff mentioned, I think he used the 80%. When we have about 80% of enrollment finished, then did you say that, Dr. Huff, that when we get to about 80%, we'll have a good idea of what of the numbers of students we'll have virtually and in person?
So we are dependent on human behavior here. Now we're
right,
going to have to,
yeah.
I believe we're going to have to
understand.
start making a decision by the second week of August, whether it's 30% or 80%. We're going to have to start making some decisions. Now, I will say this, it is statistically significant when you get over, that 20%, 25% range. It's probably not going to change a lot, but we are concerned that the behaviors of those that are enrolling may be affecting what our percentages are. For instance, the folks that are wanting to be virtual may be a little more passionate about getting their name in first, and maybe we're seeing a little bit higher number of virtual folks just because they want to get their name in there first. We don't know. I
can see that.
Now, I will say that it's not reflective of the survey that we took of parents. When we took the survey, it was 16% that were choosing virtual option, and we're starting to see more like 30%. So it is going to be an interesting couple of weeks.
Okay, so you're saying we won't necessarily have to wait for 80%.
Well, we can't.
We need to go with a date because parents need to know.
And we need to make
decisions. They have to make decisions. Yeah.
So we are sending out, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, that's okay.
We are sending out information to try to encourage parents this year, especially, to enroll early, because we do see trickling enrollments all the way up until the day school starts and then even beyond. We would like to have as many in as possible so we can make a good decision.
Well, I see that one of our big hang-ups with with Ray team recommendations and with what we've talked about is this K through 3, 100% or 50%. But are you saying that that's going to be discussed more with the reopening group and with Ray team?
That is what I
on
said.
the matrix.
That is
Dr.
what I said.
Huff.
That,
Yeah.
and just to remove some confusion, because I've seen some of the comments and some of the discussions here, but there aren't two versions necessarily. There is a first version that was at that stage, went to Ray team, and then it was massaged more based on feedback, based on what's out there in articles and science, and came into this following version that went to the reopening committee. So there were not two versions that went to the Ray team and two versions that went to the reopening committee. This is really the same document that has transformed as it's moved through the process and gotten feedback.
But that's one of our big issues is this 50% or when, okay. And then one more question, isn't pre-K, did I read that wrong in all this info? It's not going to be virtual, is it?
Okay, so when we are 100% virtual, we'll do 100% virtual for everybody. Now,
well,
we did
yes,
not, though, I'm sorry, we did not give the option to go virtual to pre-K folks. So in the enrollment process, they cannot choose pre-K virtual. But in the first 2 weeks, there will be
they'll be virtual then. But then they'll either go, if we have in person, they'll be there after the first 2 weeks, if the plan works like that. When we go to in person, pre-K is either going to be there in person or not at all.
Because that's the discussion that needs to take place. And so that is probably the biggest thing that needs to be discussed through next week is exactly what you said. When we bring, and there's a variety of different options that could be there. Maybe we bring pre-K back 100% right off the bat. Maybe we have the other phase where we bring them back 50% based on, and then move that to 100% based on a threshold. Maybe we say that when we go from 100% virtual to in person, that maybe we do this kind of phase-in process where the pre-K through 3 does an every other day thing for 2 weeks to allow teachers the opportunity to be able to teach kids the processes that they're going to need to have to be safe at school before we bring them back 100%. That's what we need to discuss, is get a lot of opinions on what that needs to look like.
So really, parents are just going to have to wait a little while, a couple more weeks probably.
Want to get it right.
But they need to know the real thing. They don't need to just know something. They need to know what really is most likely to happen so they can make their plans for whoever's going to help be there with their child virtually. But at least after tonight, we'll know, assuming that we approve this, that we'll start September 8th and the first 2 weeks will be virtual for everybody.
And I think we can fairly firmly say that there are some things we can fall back on within the matrix that will eventually be there. One is it's going to be scientifically based. And two is that there will be thresholds based on easily attainable and understandable information. Those sorts of things haven't really been debated. It's really about what the thresholds mean and who comes back and how much of a level they come back at and that sort of thing. And that's really the level of discussion.
Okay, I had one more question.
Go ahead.
Will the number of instructional assistants we need depend on enrollment after we know who's coming in person?
So,
because instructional assistants would instructional assistants also be used virtually?
So most of our instructional assistants are tied to special services, and those instructional assistants who provide that is usually tied to an IEP. So at this point, those services provided by instructional assistants will be driven by the IEP. And in all cases and every time, the number of instructional assistants we have is determined by what's required from the IEPs that our students have. So we'll have probably the same number of instructional assistants. It will just depend on how they're going to deliver the services that are written in the IEP.
Brian, in regards to enrollment, are we about where we normally are, or are we less, or more?
Steve is probably a better one to answer that.
So thank you, Dr. Huff. I spoke to Miss Early today. As you know, Miss Early oversees our enrollment process. She is highly encouraged by the response of our community and our parents. As you know, the entire process is online this year for all families. Our few families have to come in and deliver some documents, or maybe come in and answer a question or two, need a little in-person help. But the majority of our families are taking care of this online, and the response has been very strong. And we are, I'll say, ahead of where we normally are in the process, given the time frame. She's very encouraged and very pleased with how things are going, and her team is doing an outstanding job of processing all the enrollments.
All right.
I have a quick question. How many have any other school districts in the Kansas City area decided to go all virtual for this first semester? And if so, who? Do you know?
Kansas City Public Schools I don't think anybody has declared for the entire semester, Ms. Blank. I think they're working on their own matrix. KCPS has one where cases have to be on a downward trend for 14 days in a row. Now, what if that's 25% and they drop down, they go a percent each day and they're down to 15% or 10%. I don't know where, looking at their plan, you can't tell whether they're tied to a certain percentage. Grandview is coming back, and also they're coming back on September the 8th. KCPS is. I think Grandview is doing the same. We're starting to see some of the others doing the same thing, coming back on the 8th, some going virtual for 14 days, others starting in person in a limited capacity. It's important to note the limited capacity in Jackson County. When we say 100%, that doesn't mean 30 fifth graders in a classroom. Right now, we're on a 50% capacity in classrooms like we have in summer school, and that's 10 kids per class that can socially distance. So that may throw another wrench into the plan as we move forward, because if we're looking at 70% of the kids that want to come back, and we get to come back, but we're still under the mandate from Jackson County that we can only have 50% of our building capacity, we're going to have to look at some sort of alternating schedule to get all of those kids in class, or some creative scheduling. So the additional time and knowing what those enrollments are will be critical.
Dr. Hux?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Dr. Huff, the other Dr. H, Dr. Huff. Are you there?
I'm here, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to this issue of simplicity on this matrix. And you may be right. I mean, our families may really be wanting the science and really into the details of the curves, the Jackson County website. I'm not certain of that, but I think that case needs to be tested. Okay, it's one thing for us to say in this conversation that parents will understand what's on that matrix and they'll know what they can anticipate for the next week or so. But if we're wrong on that assumption, then we're going to have some confidence issues potentially with respect to our families. And I'm not sure how this would shake out, but I'd like you to get some data, some surveys that would enable us to understand whether they'll understand this matrix so they can predict their lives. And I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet, but I won't know until we do the survey, until we go out and ask people, what do you think about this, and will you understand it, and will you be ready to decide, a week after we give the go signal, that you can have someone come in or grandma come in and take care of the child? Because you see what I'm saying? There's 8,700 kids here. Look at the number of parents. And I'd really like you to give me some hardcore data on this before we sign off on this matrix.
All right. So there's two aspects to that. One is, let me address the what we're doing to try to help folks understand first. One of the things I didn't mention early on, the way that we have this designed is you can anticipate. You have 7 days of anticipation as we move through the matrix, right? So as you go below a level, let's say that we've dipped below 10% and we have 9.5% one day on the percent positives. That's going to trigger the 7-day starting process. That's when we're going to start informing families. And we're going to send information out saying, okay, we are now below this particular level. We're not going to depend on just the matrix and the graph for folks to understand. We'll make it a big part of our website, a little countdown meter. I don't know, Danielle always comes up with great ideas, and that we can communicate that process very clearly all along the way. We're at day 6, we're at day 5. If we continue to be on this trend, we will be back in school on this day. And then if for some reason, day 4, it pops up to 10.1, we put the information out saying, we're not coming back until it gets below 10 for 7 days. So the clock starts over. And right now it's not even ticking anymore. And so it really is about communication all along the way. The feedback that we're getting is through the parents that are part of the reopening committee. The one hesitation we would have about sending the matrix out as part of a survey is the matrix is definitely not in a final form at this point in time. I do love the idea of getting parent feedback, and Travis is the king of getting feedback right now, and he is absolutely listening as to, you know, how can we get as much feedback as possible. Because when we come back to you on August 10th, we want to have had all those conversations so that people feel comfortable about what's on the matrix, feel comfortable about applying the matrix and reading the data that they need to have in order to be able to understand the matrix.
So Travis, I guess I will be receiving that information from you.
So yeah, what I think the plan should be, kind of like with our draft reopening guide, is that we work through it to try to come up with something to put in front of the board on the 10th, like we talked about earlier, and we place it out on the website just like we did with the reopening committee, or with the reopen guide, and solicit feedback on that. And we can also be proactive and try to develop some survey questions for sure.
Any other questions?
Is that all the presentations that are going to be done this evening?
That's it. That's it, Mr. Moore.
All right. So you want us to make a formal motion that we approve the September 8th start date? Is that a yes?
Yes, with the caveat that we begin virtual learning on that date through September the 22nd or 21st, 14 days.
Rachel, are you going to put that form of a motion up, or you want me to just ad lib one?
I'm working on it either way.
Mr. President, I move that we move our start date to September the 8th with a 2-week virtual teaching period to be evaluated at that time to whether we see go longer or we can bring students back on a phase-in basis. You can shorten that if you want to, Rachel.
Is there a second?
Second. I was on mute. Sorry.
Is there any other discussion?
Yeah. I like to say that my only hesitation, I know it's just a draft or whatever, before it's a date, and I just like to maybe do a little bit more consideration with the teachers. I know that they can't have the same consideration maybe as the students as far as virtual or in person. But just knowing what that would look like, what percentage of teachers are really wanting to be virtual, and if we're heading into a problem later on when enrollment comes up. I mean, maybe we can drive enrollment if we knew just about how many teachers would be willing to be in person, or which teachers were planning not to be in person, even though they may have said they were comfortable at one time. We did have less a percentage of teachers, I got it right, what Travis was saying, that said they were comfortable. Just knowing that number, we don't have to promise them anything, but I think we need to know what that is. Also, just as like we want to know when it comes to students.
I agree with Mr. Barnes. I'm sorry, with Mr. Burton on that. That's some vital information that we need to know, because teachers are important as well as our students are.
I agree with Alonzo also on that.
I agree with all of you on that point. I think it's essential.
Well, and that would be part of the reevaluation
Yeah.
at the time, as to now that we want to come back and in-person teaching, how many are comfortable doing that? And then what are we going to do, where we go from there? So that may be covered in the motion if you look at its entirety.
You can have that data ready on the 10th. We'll ask those questions.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is asking the question, do you feel comfortable coming back to teach? I think we have to ask some multiple questions. One,
will you?
yeah. Will you come back to teach to students? I think also, are you willing to come back if we are virtual, to come back into the building and work from your class? There's a lot of questions that probably could be asked that we need to get answers to. But we'll work on that and have that ready for the 10th.
Thank you.
You might have to think about whether that should be a blind survey rather than have names associated. There may be some legalities there that you might want to consider.
I think so. I think we need to ask the question. I thought the same thing, but I'd like to talk to legal about, well, can we determine it just by like grade, or not grade level, but elementary, secondary, just to try to get an idea of where they're at, where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Dr. Markley.
Any other questions or comments? All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right. So we approve the motion to start virtually on September 8th. Before you have a motion to adjourn, are there any other comments or questions anyone wants to make? I do want to make just a couple comments in support of the board and the administration and the committees. Everybody's been working very hard. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, this board has in fact met in person in the same room when we've had closed session meetings. But we've never, ever had a meeting where we've had over 300 people attend a meeting, which we had tonight. And we, especially with both of our high school auditoriums being under renovation, we could not have had a socially distant meeting with everyone participating. And if we had everybody together in the same room, we wouldn't have been able to gather all these questions that we gathered tonight, because that's not a normal part of a school board meeting. So we have had extra people be able to be involved, participate, and ask questions. They'll be answered later. But I wanted to mention that. I also just want to add a personal note that I don't normally do this, but my family has been touched personally by COVID, as my mother's husband passed away just over a week ago from this. So I am not going into this blindly, and we're not discounting any opinions or teachers or students or parents or anything. We all take this very seriously. We also know that children are suffering in many different ways by not being in school. There's, like I said at the very beginning, there's no win situation here. We're all trying to do the very best we can with what we have before us. And I also want to add one other thing. We are asking the teachers to do some hard things, and I personally am not going to ask you to go into the classroom if I'm not willing to do that myself, and I'm going to be going into the classroom as a substitute teacher when that time comes. So, the board supports the teachers, but it's a lot of hard things that have to be decided. So, thank you for your support. Thank you for all the work that's being done by lots of different people.
Mr. Moore, if I could real quick before you go, just thank you to the high schools, the staffs at the high schools. We had graduation last Sunday at Starlight, and it went over just beautifully. Couldn't have anything any smoother. It may have been one of the better graduations we've had, just the way it worked out. So thank you to all of them for making that, Dr. O and Dr. Bruton and all the people at both South and Raytown High. It was a nice event, and I'm glad we were able to do it for the kids.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and we sent a nice thank you letter to Starlight for their fantastic assistance and all that. So, yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Mr. Moore?
Yes, Ms. Salisbury.
I just want to tag on to what some of the things that you were saying too. First of all, I offer you my condolences in the loss. But I think there appears sometimes that there's a no-win situation because someone is going to be displeased with the decision. But I want to commend the administration for the work that they have put in this, because I know it was not an easy task, coming to some conclusions on recommendations. So I commend you for the challenge that you had to go through.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all those involved. And like we all know, many of these things are being changed daily. We did not plan at our last meeting, we did not plan to open up September 8th, but things have changed and recommendations were put in front of us. So things are constantly changing. So yes, appreciate that. Any other final comments? All right, thank you. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I move that the board adjourn the special Board of Education meeting at 8:12 p.m.
A second.
All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, thank you. We'll see you at our next meeting, August 10th. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.